Hey guys, how are you doing? I'm Corey. He's Such. This is the Third Perspective podcast. This will be episode 30. And as always, the opinions expressed here are our own. Such, how you doing today?
I'm skitty. I'm giddy like a schoolgirl, man. That's all I know.
That's
Everyone's
fan-
gonna find out. Everyone's gonna find out why. But yeah,
that's
I'm good, man.
fantastic. So, episode 30, very, very exciting. Today we have David Proctor on. And David is, by his own self-admitted bio, an ultramarathoner, a speaker, an RMT, and as of a little while ago, a number one best-selling author on Amazon.ca for his book Untethered, the comeback story of one of the longest, fastest runs in history. Without further ado, Dave, welcome to the podcast.
Hey Corey, hey Such. So happy to be here. I'm getting like a schoolgirl too. Can't wait to tell you. Can't wait to tell you all my stories.
I can't wait to hear them, man.
So obviously, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. But I think that you telling your own story, at least to start off, is going to be the best way to introduce you. So Dave, why don't you tell us your story?
Yeah. Hey, I'm a father of three. My kids are 18, 15, and 13. I'm in my mid 40s. I've been running ultra marathons all my life. Ever since I was in my early 20s, I was fascinated by these people that could run 100 kilometers or 100 miles in one go. And I up until that point, I've never heard of anybody ever doing that. Probably a lot like you guys and your listeners. Curious as hell. And, I signed up for a race, 100-kilometer race about 18 years ago, and had my butt handed to me. Man, that was the hardest thing I've ever done. But also this world kind of ignited and kind of opened up to me of like doing hard things. And ever since I've been hooked. I've run hundreds and hundreds of ultra marathons, hundreds of thousands of kilometers over my running career, thousands of marathons. Throughout the years, I started winning races, getting better at my craft of running longer distances faster than other people, and started breaking Canadian records, going to world championships, breaking world records. And all along the way, I was mesmerized, absolutely mesmerized by this guy named Al Howie, who back in 1991, he ran across Canada in 72 days, 10 hours, and 23 minutes. So that's 100 kilometers a day for 72 days in a row. And these mythical creatures, these giants upon giants that walk amongst us that make it look easy, it opens up a box that you start thinking, if that guy could do that, what's impossible? It kind of redefines your space. So decades of work later, I attempted the run across Canada in 2018. I failed. I only got 1/3 of the way across. And back in 2022, I started off in St. John's on May 15th. Got to Victoria on July 21st, setting the Trans-Canadian speed record by running Canada 105 kilometers a day for 67 days, 10 hours, and 27 minutes. And I was counting.
Man, that's amazing. All I have to, man, I think people might not understand how savage an attempt and accomplishment that is. Like it sounds, oh yeah, cool, 100 kilometers every day for 67 days, 10 hours. But man, like you're running a pace probably in and around 6 minutes a kilometer, 6 to 6.5 in and around there, even during those elevation gains. So like, man, that is ridiculously challenging. Amazing.
Well, thank you. And so let's talk a little bit about fitness for a second, right? Because, it's years and years and years of structural tolerance that you build by running 100-mile, 150-mile, 200-mile weeks. And let's face it, I'm a father of three. I work. I'm not a professional athlete, so most of these hours are spent at 2 or 3 in the morning or after work when you really don't want to. And so it's all the hours that nobody sees, and all the effort that you put into your craft, that then in turn, you could run at a 5-minute, 45-second pace or a 6-minute per kilometer pace. And you're running with your mouth closed, breathing through your nose. You're kind of putting in an effort as if you're going for a brisk walk. And I think that was key to an event like this is, let's face it, you're running for almost 7 weeks. So you have to stay down in zone 1. You can't for a second let your ego get the better of you and like you creep up into zone 2, where then you're accumulating lactic acid and you just, you can do it. You could do it for the next 25 hours, but you can't do it for the next 2 weeks. And you just can't. And I know that. And so part of it was being patient enough, and not letting your ego get the better of you when, you feel good, or you're coming up to a hill and you're like, I could run this hill. No, you're walking the hill, because that's what this is, right? So I think that the fitness built into the run across Canada made it so that the run across Canada looked a bit easier than what it was.
Mm-hmm. Did you have to train specifically for that, for the Trans-Canada run, or do you feel like maybe you needed one kind of training block or 2 training blocks? Do you think your experience over your lifetime contributed to the fitness that you have? And obviously it did, but I just want to understand to which degree it did.
Yeah, I think that there's no way you can train for this. There's no possible way. Like I was running 250 kilometers a week in order to get ready enough to run across Canada. The very first week was 740 kilometers. The next week was 740. The next one was 745, 745, 750. And you do that week after week after week. The best way to put it is the second week is a lot easier than the first week. And the third week is a lot easier than the second week. And what you do by running out there all day, every day, and you're developing kind of this tolerance, right? And you're also running further away from the start line. So you don't even remember on day 25 days ago when you were living in comfort, you don't remember that. So that's why the first 10 days is so bloody hard, is because, you remember on day 5, you remember 5 days ago sitting on your sofa eating ice cream. And we always compare like comfort. Let's face it, comfort is what you remember being comfortable is. That's your definition of that. On day 35, you don't have a definition of comfort, because like you forgot what any type of comfort feels like. And that's what I talk to a lot of Navy SEALs, right? And I tell them like hell week is too short. Like you're just getting into your groove where you start to forget about that comfort piece. So yeah. So the training, I think, is more mental, and then as well too, it's more digestive. So putting a lot into your gut and learning and training your body for gastric emptying. So because it's more of an eating contest running across the country than it is a running contest. You're eating 9,000 calories of food while you're running every day. And if you don't train for it, you don't train for it. You're screwed, right? And the other piece, and God, guys, we could talk for hours about this, is distress tolerance, right? Is like you are constantly in a state of distress all the time. But how do you mindfully make peace with that? And how do you be like, meh, it's all good.
I think that's an interesting point that you bring up there. I think that we've developed ourselves to be out of that distressed thing, because when you think about it, our natural state is to be in distress, right? It's the idea of finding food, finding shelter, protecting ourselves from the elements and whatnot. I think our bodies are designed to do that. But I think over years and years and decades of, as you said, comfort, I think we've gotten away from that, where we view it as being wrong. Like we shouldn't be in this state, whereas we're actually built for it.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Corey. I think that, and I'm not making up that term, the comfort crisis. There's a great book called The Comfort Crisis that was written, and it just explains that we thousands of years ago had to compete for limited resources, and those limited resources were attached. Like that was comfort, lighting a fire at night so you didn't freeze to death, finding a bush of berries. The three of us guys would have to compete over finding that, right? And so, but a little bit of comfort was at the tail end of that, which we took in that comfort. That's dopamine, right? And therefore, then, we, sit down and settle with that for a second, but then we're really motivated to go seek out more comfort, because it's linked to survival. That's why we're the dominant species on this planet. But, in this world where we live in right now, and this is why I love podcasts like yours, is that, it kind of teaches us and describes to us in detail, that there is pleasure in pain. There's pleasure and discomfort. There's sometimes the cure for the comfort crisis is to push on the side of pain. And it's because when you end up feeling that discomfort, you actually feel like living. There's nothing, for me personally, I feel that there's nothing more uncomfortable in the world than being content, and not having anything to do. An aimless mind and an aimless body we seem to think that that's where we want to go, but that's a lie, because that's when I feel the worst in the world. So no, Corey, you bring up a great point.
Mm.
I love that, man. I totally love everything that you're saying, because I think kind of the same way, in the sense of like chasing that adversity, every opportunity that you can kind of find it in, even if it may not be there on the first sort of look at it. And so for me, over the last couple years, I mean, the training is one piece, but really I've had to become a different person altogether to be able to take on the tasks that I'm hoping to take on. And what it's required of me is exactly what you're saying. Looking at things not in a negative way of difficulty, but there's not pleasure, but meaning behind the pain, right? There's purpose behind the pain, which now is, and I was talking to Corey about this some time ago. Now I get excited for certain things, whereas before I never really had that excitement. I'd be more anxious. So like, say, for example, let's say the weather's terrible out, like a couple weeks ago, I went to Halifax and went to a 50K, and the weather was horrendous, 80, 90 kilometer winds, pretty cold, all this kind of stuff. I was happy. I was excited in that. I was like, yes, bring it. Like, but a few years ago, I've been like, oh my God, I got to do a run in this. So I relate to exactly what you're saying.
Oh, and to that point further, like that's insane. And it's amazing. It's amazing how we can turn things around by the way that we look at it, right? I have to do this versus I have an opportunity to do this. That's pretty rad.
I get to do this.
I get to do this, and I think that was one of the big, key pieces. And this is one of the things I discuss in length in my book is, the 2022 effort, the run across Canada where I was successful. I did it for me. I didn't do it for a cause. I didn't do it for charity, rare disease or cancer or mental health. And that was a real struggle. Like, a lot of people were like, dude, you should be doing this for somebody greater than yourself. But when it comes to a speed record, when it comes to like, you got 24 hours in a day, and if you're not running, you're eating. If you're not eating, you're sleeping. Putting in a national awareness campaign like we did in 2018 with the Rare Disease Foundation, with Outrun Rare, man, that took a lot out of me. And, you almost get thinking at the beginning of the day when you start running that I have to run versus I get to run. And it's such a massive difference, right? Like, do I need to do this or do I get to do this? And, it's taking a look at that other side of the coin. I feel is like this mindset superpower that we all have where, you get to lean into doing difficult things, desire for comfort, and let's face it, desire for comfort makes slaves out of kings, whereas patience and discipline makes kings out of slaves. And that comfort is always there. But that patience and discipline, when you take that, you feel like a freaking king.
I totally agree. Love it.
I think it's something too that I'm trying to instill in my daughters as well. And I know some of our listeners are taking from that, is I let them know, especially when they're worried about stuff, you're built for hard things. You're built to do hard things. The fact they're hard is the point. And the fact that my wife often looks at me after I've had issues with something and she goes, "Did you die?" I'm like, "No." She's like, "All right, then keep going." Like, we forget, like I said, that we're designed to do hard things, that we should do hard things. We shouldn't steer away from them. That should be the norm, that we're doing hard things and then being rewarded with some form of comfort, like you said, a fire or a bushel of berries or something in the end. But understanding that you can strive to do hard things as a baseline.
Yeah, and I think that we've moved so far away from that, because let's go back to the comfort crisis for a second, right? Like, we've evolved. We got really good at living, us humans. Like, there's 8 billion of us now, right? Like, we've gotten so good at living, at surviving, finding that bush of berries, lighting that fire at night, because those comforts make us survive. So what do? The next generation makes twice as many comforts. And then the next generation makes 3 times as many comforts. And here in 2024, you got a grocery store with 20,000 food items you don't need to gather, hunt, grow, or prepare. And like in my town, I've got 5 of those.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's comfort 101, right? So, but living in our world right now, like, let's face it, like we have a tremendous amount of comfort. We're all in homes that have furnaces and sleeping on comfortable beds, and life is good. But let's face it, that our minds always choose survival over top of reward. Always. Like your mind will always go, okay, we better rest to live to fight another day tomorrow. When you're working out, that's that voice in your head, right? Is pulling you back away from something that might have been harmful, 20,000 years ago for our ancestors, right? Doing a difficult thing, going and lifting heavy weights. It's like, okay, you know what? Your ancestors 20,000 years ago, you wouldn't go and do that. You wouldn't run across Canada. Like that's foolish, right? And so, but I think that we have to kind of go back inside of our brains and ask ourselves the simple question, okay, is my entire life a lie? That I'm in distress, that I'm going to die here, that this is a survival situation? Because back to that whole, your mind will always choose survival over top of reward, always. But am I in a dire strait where I am needing support? And that's where, when I was running across Canada, I was talking to my sports psychologist every week while I was running, and that's what she always asked me. She's like, hey, you starting to believe that voice in your head? And I've even named my voice. His name's Emilio, and he's a salamander. And he, whispers messages that I'm not good enough, I'm not strong enough, and people don't like me. He's that guy who tells me to hit the snooze button in the morning. He's the guy when I'm having a cold bath telling me I can't handle this anymore, but yet I've never died of cold water immersion yet. I haven't died of a hard effort on a run. So, chances are Emilio, my voice, he's lying, right? And I know it, but yet I somehow tend to listen to him sometimes.
So when has Emilio been the strongest for you? Was it during your run, or was it during your training, or another particular time?
Well, okay. So yeah. So now we're going to jump into a bit of a story time, right? Because and I'm going to kind of ruin a part of the book. When Emilio, when that voice gets loud, everybody else has to get loud too, right? So about 10 years ago, when my kids were younger, I would always read Winnie the Pooh to them, right? Great books. You got Tigger, you got Eeyore, you got Piglet. Ultimately, these are your feelings and emotions, right? And it's teaching kids about how to identify your feelings and emotions by drawing out really fun characters. Like how rad is that? Smart. I was out for a long run one day and I was like, you know what? Why don't I do that? Why don't I create very real characters that are out with me during every run? So when I was running across Canada, every day I had my 4 animals with me. So when Emilio got loud, who's that salamander stuck on my left side of my brain and between my skull and my brain, and he whispers, messages that I'm not good enough, I'm not strong enough, and I should quit. You look up in the sky and you see your eagle. And my eagle is always flying well above my head, and he's always looking in the direction that I'm running. And you could tell that he can see something up there that you can't see down here from where you're standing or running. And he's stoic. He doesn't say anything, but we all have, these people in our lives that they don't have to say anything in order to prove a message, right? They're incredible leaders. They're incredible people. And you're like, you just look at them and you're like, yep, on course, delayed gratification, kind of it's stoicism. It's what it is. It's kind of like your father, right? But then you got your coyote, and my coyote's always running in the ditch next to me, behind me. You always look back at him. He never looks at you because he does not make eye contact with you because he doesn't respect you. But he's always biting. And in my running life, I've been bitten tens of thousands of times. And boy, it hurts. I've spent a tremendous amount of time throwing rocks and kicking and screaming at him and wasting a lot of time hoping that he's going to go away, but he never goes away. And obviously he's my relationship with pain, right? But as I mentioned, that coyote never makes eye contact with me, right? Because he's busy looking up in the sky because he makes eye contact and keeps his eye on the big black fire-breathing dragon, always doing figure eights up in the air. And he should keep he should keep eye contact with him because he's afraid of him, because he should be afraid of him. He's a big black fire-breathing dragon, and he's capable, and he's strong, and he's powerful. And when he says he's going to do something, he does it. And I love looking up at that dragon because I see that in myself. And ultimately, the long story short, I am that dragon up in the sky. That is me. I am strong. I'm brave. I'm powerful. I'm all of those things. And sometimes we're uncomfortable being great. So he is flying in the distance, and that the distance between me and him is the distance I create. Every once in a while, when I'm struggling, when I was struggling running up the Canadian Rockies, all those climbs, I tethered myself to that dragon, and the dragon gave me a tow up. Now, let's face it, if I am that dragon, if that's me, then what are you doing listening to a stupid salamander?
Oh, yeah, awesome. Now, a question for you. You brought something up in there. You said we have difficulty being great. Why is that? Why do we as people and personalities have a problem with being great, even though we constantly strive to be?
Yeah, I think we want to be great, but that's a lot of pressure. Once you're great, then you're supposed to continue being great, aren't you? Mm-hmm. You can't show the world your flaws. You can't be vulnerable. You can't cry. You can't be real, right? And so I've struggled with that all my life. I've done great things. I've done hard things. I've surprised myself, but yet, sometimes the hardest part of doing something great is the aftermath of needing to then be that person that, you have kind of put as a snapshot out to the world, and or replicating it and continually putting that pressure upon yourself to be one up and to do one better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for me, I love everything that's being said so far. It's awesome. But I think for me, in terms of, I have a bit of a distinction in terms of the great and defining that, because I agree with you. There's a lot of pressure if you were to put that onto yourself. Oh, I'm great, or I'm doing great things or whatever. But I think for me, what I've kind of learned in the small little time that I have on this little bit of a journey I've been on, not so much seeking greatness, but searching out or trying to search out excellence. So for me, I want to just pursue excellence. I want to pursue the best version of myself. And I think if with that at the forefront, for me, it helps diminish that pressure of trying to be great. I need to be the greatest. Well, how can one be the greatest out of so many amazing people? Mm-hmm. But you can search out excellence. You can go towards excellence. You can strive to be better. And I think for me, that's reduced some of that pressure of that greatness, quote unquote.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. And I think that's that's more of a healthy approach, right? I think guys like myself, and I almost feel, when I talk to people, that, have done transcons or come back from the Olympics or what have you, there's this constant, number one, you're always being chased by a tiger, right? You're never good enough. And then number two is, even if you are good enough, you're not satisfied. Mm-hmm. And it's a bit torturous. Like, it's not, and I'm trying to find that right now, because I should be satisfied with this, but I'm not. And hey, you know what? I'm 43 years old. By the time I'm 53, if I keep going about that, I'm going to be in trouble, I think.
Yeah, for sure, man. I think it's a good thing to consider. I mean, you've accomplished a great deal, man. And you've set a standard for a lot of people. And for people like me, I need a standard to chase. And so for me, I get emotional thinking about this, man, because I've been thinking about
Mm.
you for a few years, as um, a person to chase, chasing
Mm.
excellence, pursuing excellence. And I think for you, and I think this will be probably more of this coming, maybe some of that emptiness will be filled by people like me saying what I'm saying to you
Mm.
right now.
Amen. Absolutely. Yeah, and I agree. And I ever since writing this book, like, that's the coolest thing about now being an author and being a storyteller is I kept a lot of the stuff in, and now, putting it out there, and the greater population reading it, and everybody's got their Everest, right? Like, everybody's got their thing. Either it's, I want to run a marathon, or I want to lift this heavy weight, or I want to, run an obstacle course race, or whatever it is. But we love hearing the stories of the people that have done it. We respect those who do hard things. And yeah, running across the country 105 kilometers a day was hard. And if you find somebody who says, "Yeah, no, it's easy," hey, they're just out of it. They have no idea. They have no real idea, because it took the world out of me to do this. But yeah, it's to your point, like, there's a time and place where you become a storyteller. You do the thing, and then you inspire others to go do the thing. And I feel like I'm getting to that place where it's like, maybe I need to redefine what's doing hard things. Like, hey, I'll face it. I'll say it to you guys. Like, writing this book was harder than running across the country, because I'm not a writer.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know. Like, if you said, "Hey, Dave, go play guitar and do the play free ride," it's like, I don't know how to do that, because I'm not a guitar player. But hey, go run 100 miles. Yeah, I could do that, because I've been doing that all my life. And so, yeah, maybe my next stage in life is being a storyteller. And the joy in which that I've taken from doing hard things like the run across Canada, go and inspire others to go take on things that they seem to think are way bigger than what they could possibly do, but teach them in little ways of all the tiny 1 million habits that you need to accomplish on the way to going and doing something excellent.
100%, man. And I think, listen, man, I think it's such a gift, for you to have accomplished that, to be able to give everyone else in Canada that gift. And what I mean by that is, man, I'm in Vancouver. There's a 26-year-old kid out in Halifax. Now we're both striving to get after the record that you created for us, right? So now, what does that mean just for two individuals? What that means for us two individuals, we're working our hardest every single day to accomplish something that we never thought possible for ourselves, number one. But that's also affecting every single person around me and him over there. So now the
Yeah.
ripple effect, based upon what you've already done, I want you to feel good about something, man. Over 2 years, I've raised over $50,000 just from running around for veterans and first responders mental health issues. That's partially because of what you've done, right? And so
That's awesome. Love that.
if you hadn't broken a record, I'd be still at the 72 days, and I probably could do that. But
Okay.
now I have to push it even further, so I got to see what more I'm capable of.
Yeah.
And man, there's so many awesome things that are coming out of that. And the reality is, if I continue doing what I'm doing and all these other things, maybe millions of dollars get raised based upon
Right.
one dude in Alberta that wanted to see what was possible. Man, I think it's an amazing thing, and
Well, thank you.
I think you should, if you don't already feel it, I don't even know what more there is from a physical perspective that you can do other than share your story to inspire more people.
No, and I agree, and thank you so much. That's the greatest compliment that you could have paid me, because I know how I feel about Terry Fox. I know how I feel about Al Howie, and I thank them every day for, the opportunity to go run with them, because there were ghosts out there. They're both passed away, of course. But I was never alone out there. I was running with ghosts. You're running against or with the people that have done it before you. And you know what? If they didn't do it, like Bannister running the 4-minute mile, if he didn't do it, would the world know that it's possible? That we're looking at the 2-hour marathon coming up. It's exponential. And I think the cool thing about an ultra endurance running and the growth within the sport is that it used to be the marathon. Everybody's like, oh man, my goal is to one day run a marathon, or I know somebody who ran a marathon. Now it's 100 miles. And with books like Untethered, and then and there was a documentary film crew that came out along with me, and they captured every step across the country. So when that movie comes out, I have a feeling we're going to see an insurgence of people, putting in efforts across the country. There's a guy doing it right now. There's a guy from New Zealand running across the Canadian Rockies right now in like -30 weather. That's insane. But yet he's still out there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, question.
There's so many. Sorry, I just want to say one more thing, if you don't mind. There's so many amazing people out there that we don't know, and it's important that we highlight these amazing people in our own country and not looking at other countries to highlight those people. But we have them right here as our next door neighbors.
Yeah, for sure. Now, a question for you, Dave, and even you, Such, with your exploits. Do you think that it's harder to be the first, or do you think it's harder to be the guy who follows up, or the girl who follows up afterwards? And I don't mean that just from beating a time or beating a distance, but is there anything in there where the unknown is harder than the known?
Yeah, I think the unknown is harder. I think the unknown is a lot harder because, if somebody else has done it before, if somebody else has put in that effort, if somebody else has gone to that depths, and they didn't die, and they're okay, then you're going to be okay as well too. I think that by far the biggest issue when it comes to the endurance game is doubt. When you have doubt and you don't believe that you're going to be okay, that's a kiss of death. And if somebody hasn't done it before, how do you not doubt? When things get really ugly out there and you're like, oh, I'm in trouble here. How do you? It's really it almost becomes impossible to suspend that doubt, and to fall back on, like, you know what, I better stop here because I think I'm going to be in serious trouble. I don't know about you guys and you Such, but like, every time that you get put into a position where you have an opportunity of quitting and then you quit, it right away, and you're like, okay. Yeah, I built this mountain out of a molehill, and I kind of hate the fact that I let the salamander win in that argument.
100% agree, man, and this is a lot of helpful information for me to be able to frame and understand how to properly think moving forward. And what do I mean by that? I have a question for you, actually. Do you think, because this is kind of how I'm thinking and how I'm going to maybe frame things, and I want to get your insight on this. If I can frame in my mind, I'm okay to die on the run. Because for me, I think my main issues when I'm running is to, let's say if I'm trying to catch your pace and I just can't catch it. Now that's in my head. Now I got to think about that for, let's say, 50 days. But I think if I can remove that, because you'll know within the first 4 days if you're going to beat the record or not, 3 days, whatever it is. So, if I can remove that fact, I think I can kind of square that away if it ever happens. The second piece is, okay, am I okay to die now? If I'm okay to die on this run. And I think that's the main one that I think I might have to address, because I will likely feel things and experience things that I've never experienced before, which will create that doubt that you're talking about. And I think in order to remove that doubt, maybe there has to be a level of, okay, I'm okay to die on the run if it happens. Do you think that would be a right way to think?
Such, I think you're nailing it. So, okay. There's many parts of that, right? So let's just touch on one touch point right now, right? Oh God, where do we start here? Yeah, so let's start with like, am I willing to die on this run? Meaning, what level of worth am I putting in this effort, right? And if I went out for a run right now and I was like going to go do a 40-kilometer run, but it doesn't really matter. It's just junk miles. It doesn't really matter. Am I going to get done the run? No, because I haven't stapled this discipline of worth around it. One of my favorite books ever written was Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And, he's a psychiatrist who survived the Holocaust as a Jewish war prisoner. And one of his quotes in that book said that his greatest fear was that he would become abundantly aware that he wasn't worthy of his own level of suffering. Now, wrap your head around that for a second.
I might cry if I do.
Oh God, yeah, and only a guy like him in a situation like that can preach to us about quitting, right? Because he quits. He feels that he's not worthy of whatever he's going through. He quits, and he saw it every day. He saw his friend in Auschwitz, dying. The moment that they gave up hope, they're like, "What's the point? This, whatever this is, it's not worthy of this." But the moment that you feel worthy of whatever you're going through. So, I built a mental model before I left for the run across Canada. And it was a big boat. It was a sailboat that was in water. And I knew that I wanted to do something great. Like, I've got this real fear of death, right? But legends never die. Right. So, you want to run across the country in record time and leave, that stamp, you're going to have to do some hard things. Right. So, yeah, this big sailboat is in the water, is in the Pacific Ocean, and he's got this massive, massive cloud to the side of him. And this cloud is blowing super hard. Right. And this cloud has the word legacy on it, because that's a strong wind, But then, of course, the sailboat has these two massive sails to capture that wind, right? And the two sails are labeled pain and suffering, right? It's going to capture that wind. What's going to capture it is pain and suffering, right? But, the most important part of that boat is the mast of that boat. It's because it's this massive mast sticking up, and it's got the word worth on it. And I know whenever things would get ugly out there for me, and they did, like, God, guys, I could tell you the stories. When things got ugly out there, I just, stood up a little bit straighter. And I saw along my backbone, it was written worth, because I was worthy of whatever was coming my way. I was, the broken foot, the concussion, the running through COVID, all the crap that would happen over a 2-month period of time. You know what? I'm worthy of this. I'm worthy of whatever this is. The moment that you don't feel worthy of it, your mast breaks, and all of a sudden you're a dinghy just floating in the Pacific Ocean, waiting to be rescued. Yeah. And that, I feel, is a sad existence for me.
And Dave, I want to highlight something here that you're saying that I think needs to be highlighted. As you said, legacy. And I think there's a difference between legacy and fame. And I think the two words that you said there were the pain and suffering and the worth. And I think that often we lose that in today's idea. So the idea of being famous, or the idea of being known, or the idea that a lot of people know what we're doing is different than legacy. And legacy is built on the pain and suffering and the acknowledgement through that pain and suffering of what your worth is. And when all of those things equal out, you have legacy. When you don't have those, you have fame, and it disappears. It's not a legacy. And I want to make that point.
No, absolutely. And I couldn't agree more. I think that's a really important piece. And thanks for bringing that up, because it's because there's guys like even Al Howie who ran across the country, back in 1991, and nobody ever heard of him outside of the running community. Nobody really ever heard of him. Right. And it's beautiful. We can go out and be warriors at 3:00 in the morning, waking up before the kids get up. We could all be, living our legacy by going out and intentionally doing hard things. My real hope is that when I'm 80 years old, hopefully I live to be 80 years old, I look back at my life and know that the summer of 22, I just gave it my all. I used my body while I had it, to its best.
And the other portion of that, sorry, just one second.
No, it's okay.
The other point that I want to make too is the legacy that we leave. I mean, I think of you being a father and your kids knowing that you did that and knowing the effort that it took and knowing the sacrifice that it took. So, okay, maybe you're not famous specifically. You're not Kardashians or anything like that, but your kids will pass on that legacy to their kids, who will pass it on to their kids, who will pass it on to their kids in one form or another. And that will be generational legacy compared to fame of, do you remember that guy back in 2022 who, did that thing and it was a meme and it was great. And what was his name? I don't remember.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can do one. I could do one better. That legacy is getting passed on to my daughter.
Mm-hmm.
So your achievement gets passed on to my daughter.
That's so cool. That's so cool.
But it's a reality, man, and you better get used to it, because that's a reality. Like, I'm doing some crazy stuff that I never thought in a million years I'd be doing, in part because of what you've done, and that gets passed on to my daughter, who you would have never met, who's part of a different sphere of influence, who's like just entirely different space, and that's the beauty of what you've done, and also continue to do in the book, and getting out there to speak on what it takes to do these things. And I had one more quick question, from a difficulty in doing hard things perspective. Do you think you should be always testing yourself, or like for example, what am I thinking about? I'm thinking about the people who say, "Oh, I test myself all the time. I go to the gym. I work out."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But is that what we're talking about, or are we talking about something different?
Well, I think about testing yourself and being better is multifaceted. The very best runners that I know are the best people that I know. And so sometimes it's not necessarily testing yourself by, going and lifting heavier weights or going for a longer run. It's by extending yourself in gratitude and kindness to a stranger at the grocery store. It's patience with your children. It's better, stop wasting time desk scrolling and learn a new skill or anything. And so, I truly believe that, something like this run across Canada, is the accumulation of a lot of different little pieces kind of strung together. And, I think that there are a growing amount of people out there. And I think that the people, the listeners of this podcast, people that are drawn to betterment and growth are exactly those people that are saying like, hey, I'm not okay with this. I'm not okay with the norm. And I want to go become 1% better every day. And, we talked a little bit about the distress tolerance on the front end, and, going out and pounding out miles and getting really uncomfortable and then growing, inside, like your cells, they change. It's really rad. But distress tolerance, like, let's talk about distress tolerance for a second, because when things get ugly out there, because they always do, no matter what. And even if they're not ugly, you create an ugly picture for yourself. What do you fall back on? Another one of my favorite books is John Kabat-Zinn's Full Catastrophe Living, in which he talks about mindfulness in a state of distress. And that's athletics. That level of pain and suffering that's associated with illness or a loss of a loved one or whatever is felt often in a smaller ways in athletic performance. And the moment that you can use and understand certain principles where you can end up suspending judgment or bias, or letting go of a previous concept that didn't serve you, or the acceptance of your current state. Like, let's face it, acceptance. When you're running across the country, and like I ran across 4 provinces going into Ontario. And the very first sign I see when I cross into Ontario, well, a lot of provinces have kilometer markings as they go across the province. The very first sign you see when you enter into Ontario says you have 2,180 kilometers left to go until you get to Manitoba. Like, I've already grown a beard, I'm already like tired. I'm all like, it's exhausting. And the idea, and I've already had a broken foot. Like I now, if this run goes perfectly, 105 kilometers every day, it's going to take me 20 days to get across this province. And can I accept that? And there's a phrase that I use often in my book, and it's probably one of my favorite mantras. It's "this is this." I think that so much pain we have in our lives is the desire for whatever we're going through, for it to be different, for it to be better, for it to be something else. You're lifting weights in the gym and you're on your final set. You want comfort. You don't want that screaming muscle anymore. You don't want that joint discomfort. You want it to be different. But if you can suspend that and just go, this is this. This is this. This is exactly what it is. And I've got to be cool with that. Mm-hmm. Then you're cool with that. And it's amazing how easy that last set gets. When you don't want to be somewhere else, when you want to be this, when you want this to be this, there's no better superpower in the world than changing your mind about something.
Yeah. I think people miss a very important piece about physical activity, or like difficult physical activity. It's not a physical activity. I think it's 100% mental activity. Mm-hmm. When you're doing like these, okay, that's not accurate. Let's say 80 or 90%. Some of it's physical, but what I mean by that is the growth and development is both mental and physical after the fact. It's almost like you're creating a psychosomatic event, and you're creating post-traumatic growth at the other side. So that's, from my perspective, and I can only speak for myself, that's exactly what I've experienced over these 2 years, is creating a psychosomatic event every single run or every single activity that's challenging for me. And all of them have been freaking hard. But at the other end of it, I've become a different human. And that's not physically, that's mentally, because my brain has developed mental capacity and resilience through that process. So I think it's super important for people to truly understand that you can become an entirely different thing if you're willing to put in the work and effort to do so.
Yeah, I think the big thing between that is your muscles are what get you through it. Your mind is what decides whether or not you're going to do it and whether or not you're going to succeed.
Oh, that's, there's a saying that says, the mind only knows two things. It's the pictures you draw for it and the words that you tell it. And if you break that down, it's amazing. When you're doing something hard, right? Let's say burpees until you can't. It's amazing. It's absolutely astounding. How, we fail shortly after we give up, we quit, we seem to struggle. I think that, there's been countless studies in regards to, people who have run a running race and they cross the finish line and they drop, right? But then they see a child walking across the street going to be hit by a vehicle, and they sprint faster than they ran the entire race in order to go get that kid. And it was simply, really, how bad did you want it? To save that child? Hey, all three of us, we would sprint faster than we ran that race altogether. And you have stuff left in the tank. It's just, do you really want it? Have you decided that you're going to empty your tank? And for me personally, it's one of the frustrating things about ultramarathoning is, I've always looked for what comes first, the end of the rope or the bottom of the well, and I haven't found either. And it's sad because I've gotten done the run across Canada, the 24-hour treadmill world record, all these different runs, and I still had gas in the tank. Probably not a lot, but you know what? Until the day happens where I'm hospitalized, I'm like, I couldn't have. Then I think I'll become satisfied. But yeah, we do have the space in our brains in order to, exceed the edges and go a little bit further. And it's like blowing up a balloon, right? You blow up a balloon and then you deflate it a little bit and then you blow it up a bit further. You deflate it a bit and then you blow it up even a bit further. And it's amazing how elastic that balloon will get. But that's the same thing as our minds.
I think for a lot of our listeners too, because I know I've been guilty of this in the past, it's the idea of understanding what I'm capable of. It means that I need to acknowledge what I didn't do in the past. So if I come to that point where I'm like, oh, I'm strong enough to do this, and then I'm like, so it's been my fault the entire time that I haven't been doing this up until that point. And I think that's such a tough pill to swallow that we just turn around and go, no, I can't do that. Yeah, I've reached my max already. So it's definitely not my fault that I'm not where I need to be here.
No, absolutely. And to that point, I think that, like my salamander, my voice in my head, who's keeping me small, keeping me tethered, right? We have this boundary that you don't go out of, right? Once you get close to the edges, it's almost like, those invisible fences for those dogs, you get shocked, right? And it's good. It's good. Like we walk close to a cliff and the three of us should be afraid, because any closer, you're going to fall off the cliff and die. It's really good that you don't walk any closer. But we have these edges within our brains and our capacities that we convince ourselves that we're not good enough, or that we can't, or that based upon past experiences. And that was one of the reasons why I titled my book Untethered, is because when you think about a tether, right, you think about that salamander, right? And that salamander is keeping you tethered. That voice inside your head is keeping you tethered. He's keeping you small. He's keeping you safe. He's live to fight another day, right? There's a good reason for that salamander. But ultimately in 2024, we've got a fridge full of food. We've got a comfy home. We could have worked out 30 minutes longer. You could have done another set. We could do more. And not to ruin the book at all, but Untethered does not refer to the salamander and being untethered from him and going beyond. Ultimately, in the end, as I tether myself to that dragon and I tether myself to a greater part of myself, the last day when I was running across Canada and I was running across Vancouver Island, I looked up and I didn't see a dragon. I didn't see my eagle. My salamander was quiet. And my coyote was gone. And I quickly realized at that point that I was the dragon. And so therefore you're untethered. It's not about being tethered down. It's about what you're tethering up to. It's about aiming high, being great, a better form of yourself tomorrow than you were today.
I love that, man.
Now, quick question for you as well, just to switch gears here a little bit. You mentioned when you were writing your book, and I know you don't want to ruin too much of it, and we definitely want people to read it, but you mentioned that it was harder to write your book than it was to run across Canada. What was it about writing the book that was so tough for you? And does that come across in your writing?
Yeah. Well, number one, the easy answer for that is I'm not a writer. So, my hunt and peck method and my, I don't know. But I believe you can fake it until you make it. You can kind of learn to pick up the guitar and play it. You can do those things. But, the better answer and probably the more reasonable answer too is in my book, I'm extraordinarily vulnerable. I don't believe you can be courageous without being vulnerable. I don't believe that. I think that, members of the military, when they enter a battlefield, that is the ultimate form of vulnerability. I really do. And they are damn courageous in that moment. And so all throughout my book, and, it's some say it's refreshing, but it's kind of scary. The fact that I was letting everybody in. I gave everybody a front row seat, and I have no problem owning my own shit. I'll take the grandeur, but I'll tell all the people about the terrible thing I said to that waitress, you know? But it's the final chapter that really, really, really I found the most difficult to write. But then on the other hand, it's also the thing that now everybody's talking about. And it's called The Aftermath. The second last chapter ends off with me finishing in Victoria. And as I got into the crew vehicle for the very last time to go off to the hotel, I said, but little did I know that the hardest part about the run was just beginning, because it's the lows after the highs. If anybody coming back from an Olympic gold medal or going to the Olympics, the Stanley Cup final, the Grey Cup, whatever it is, man, you're on a dopamine, highway out there. I've never felt that good in my life. As much as I was broken, I've never felt that good. I was a lot yelling and screaming and crying. The last province, I felt so good. I even convinced myself that in the last couple hours that I was going to circle around the Terry Fox Monument and run back to St. John's, because I never wanted this feeling to ever end. The moment that you finish this run, you're never going to feel this good ever again in your life. And that. And that's a hard pill to swallow. But the many weeks after were absolute terror. The best way to put it is I was feeling a degree of emptiness that I've never felt in my life. And I wanted everybody to fix it. And I felt angry. I felt frustrated. I felt lost. I ruined relationships in my life. My family took it the hardest. My girlfriend, Lana Ray, who I write a lot about in the book, I can't believe she's still with me. She's a real saint. And, these lows after the highs, this dopamine deficit that we get into, there's a reason why 90% of Olympic athletes are given antidepressants when they come home, because some would argue that high that you feel at the Olympic Games, or the high that I felt in Victoria finishing, was like crystal meth times 10. And the very next day, the dopamine gods don't come. And the next week, they don't come. And the next month, they don't come. And you get desperate. And you get angry and sad and frustrated and completely lose touch with reality. And so I ended up, at the hospital. I ended up in psychiatric care. I ended up going through a lot of antidepressants. But I'm also very lucky that I've got an incredible support group that were there with me, for me. And hey, you know what? Some people even in my support group aren't around. They couldn't handle it. But yeah, I wanted to let people in. I wanted to be completely honest about, all of it. It wasn't just the run across Canada. It was the aftermath. And I feel going through that, I'm more of a whole person, but I also put a lot of people through hell, and I'm really, really sorry. If anybody's listening that I did put through hell, I'm sorry.
Hey man, I appreciate the honesty and the transparency there, because I think it's super important for people to realize that this is a thing as well, and mentally people can be affected after such an event. And so thank you, man. I appreciate you sharing that. I think the one
Absolutely.
benefit I
Thank you.
have is that one benefit I have is I'm already medicated.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You're priming the pump. Exactly. I love that.
There we go. No, and you know what? Honestly, I think that's so valuable what you just said there, because obviously we're talking about huge accomplishments and everything else, and nobody ever talks about the aftermath. But I think a lot of our listeners can probably draw parallels to their own life, even though they haven't run across Canada. It's that idea of I used to be good, or I used to do this, and now my life is this, and understanding that, yeah, you may feel that, but there is something more after that. You don't have to measure yourself off of the greatness that you once were and how far you feel you've fallen, because you haven't fallen that far. It's not quite that, right?
And the reality is this, man, and you probably already know this, is that I suspect you'll probably make a much bigger impact after running than that actual run across Canada. And I think you're just getting started. And I think there's so much more growth ahead. So it's a cool spot for you to be in, man, and I'm really stoked for you.
Thanks, man. And I am so stoked for you. I can't wait to support you through your efforts, and I think you're just gonna crush it next year.
Yeah, I'll do my best. I mean, we got a big plan this year. I'll be running from here to Thunder Bay this year. So we're going to try to practice 60 to 70K a day for 50-ish days. And
Oh,
then, so that'll be kind of a training block, but also a fundraising endeavor and all that kind of stuff.
so
And
cool.
really last August was a training block again for me, right? So for me, it's I have to put a lot of time and energy to catch up to those people who've maybe been doing this for a lot longer than me.
Right.
And I've just started running about 2.5, 3 years ago. So I think for me, I have to really do these massive blocks to get me mentally prepared to do what I hope to do in 2025.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than not knowing what you're
Mm.
getting yourself into. And sometimes every once in a while when you get yourself into it and you're like, huh, well, this ain't that bad.
Yeah.
That's golden. And so going there often and surprising yourself, I think, is the best training model you can have.
Yeah.
And fortunately for me, man, I unfortunately or not, or whatever you want to say, is I recognize that I have to take time away from work, so I have to actually train full time in order for me to prepare the right way to do this. And so I've pretty much done that, where I'm okay, all I'm doing is focusing on this and also growing what we're trying to grow in terms of the outreach and connection with people and really on, like you were saying earlier, how it was such a challenge for you to do the 2018 run because of all the other sort of things in place. That helps me a lot, because
Yeah.
that informs me that, hey, man, if I'm going to be running across Canada and the goal is to do the things that we're thinking about doing, I need an entire team in place so I don't have to do a single thing when I run across Canada. So now I'm inspired and motivated to move even further.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we'll take this offline as well too, because there's a million pieces. And even, my girlfriend, Lana Ray, who was organizing everything behind the scenes and treating me like a toddler so I could look, through my small little lens and do the things that I needed to do. And she was doing the things that she needed to do. And it behind every person who's done something great, there's no such thing as a self-made man. There's a village of people behind them, and they want to help. They want you to succeed. So, but they need to be instructed of how they can support. And build a team, a big team.
Yeah, man, that's the plan.
So I'm gonna call it. I hate to do it because, man, we're just getting started here, but I want to wet everybody's whistle here when it comes to Dave Proctor and his knowledge and things like that. I'd love our listeners to let us know, what is your cross Canada run that you've been dealing with, that you've either accomplished or failed and are trying again. I'd love to know that. We'll pass it on to Dave, see what he thinks. We'd love to have Dave back. Dave, hopefully you're willing to come back.
Anytime.
Fantastic.
Yeah, anytime. Absolutely, guys. Thanks a lot.
All right. So again, like I said, we're going to call it here. There's so many other points here that we can touch base on. But Dave, just want to have people obviously go out and buy the book. Like, again, I know that we're going to say that anyways, but go out and buy the book, especially for that final chapter. Even if all you do is read the final chapter, read the whole book, but read that final chapter and apply it to your life. But how can people get in contact you? I know you're on social media, but how can they get in contact you? How can they follow to see what's coming up next?
Yeah, probably the easiest way to get in contact with me is on Instagram at runproctor. My website's runproctor.net. But yeah, my book is available on Amazon, on Indigo, and Barnes & Noble. So yeah, head on over to Amazon and it'll show up on your doorstep the next day. I don't know how people do that. I don't know how the distribution works, but somehow, it's
what we'll do
awesome.
is we'll put the link to the Amazon in our show notes, so that if someone doesn't want to search it out, they can just click the link and go directly there.
Perfect.
Are we going to do
awesome.
that, Such, or is that going to be me?
Well, that's gonna be you, Corey.
Oh, okay, fantastic. All right.
Yeah.
Such what do you got going on? What's coming up? I know you got something pretty big coming up.
Yeah, man. So, I got my big run, which will start on World Running Day in June. We'll be running from South Surrey, White Rock area, all the way to Thunder Bay, Terry Fox Memorial. And in order to help pay for that and fundraise, we're going to be having a massive fundraising event, 30th of March at the Sandman Hotel, 180 West Georgia Street in Vancouver. And we have a slew of inspiring speakers that will be speaking on the mental health crisis and how that it's impacted and affected their life. And so what we're trying to do is raise that awareness with these speakers on the 30th, and then also raise awareness for Honor House, the charity that I support. So we'll have the president there also speaking at the event. And this will go towards helping pay for the my run. So anybody who's the speakers that we'll have will be retired Tier 1 operator, JTF2 warrant officer Sean Taylor. We'll have regimental sergeant major of E Division and performance coach and CEO of Raven Strategic, Seb Lavoie, and Travis Bader, who's a podcaster and entrepreneur, Glenn Kirkland, an Afghan war veteran and also an entrepreneur, a bunch of other speakers that are super inspiring and motivational. So anybody in the next little while, we're going to be posting a lot about that on my social. So hit me up and ask questions.
Fantastic. And from myself, Corey, I don't have anything coming up, but that's totally fine. But from all of us here at the Third Perspective podcast, thanks for joining in. We hope to see you next week. And I want you to take a think. What are your 4 animals that you walk around with? What's your dragon? What's your salamander? What's your coyote? And what's your eagle? And identify them. Anyways, guys, from all of us, see you next week. Thanks very much.
See you guys.